1998 saw the release of two high-profile war movies, Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan and Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line. These are two very different films. In this video, we'll explore them alongside each other to examine overlapping philosophical concepts of empathy, anxiety, waiting, and the infinite. Through these concepts, we can explore differences in how we see, hear, and feel what is seen, heard, and felt. By empathy, I mean how the experience of the characters of a film establish a connection with those experiencing the film. Empathy is the magic ingredient of cinema. A film is not so much watched or heard, it is experienced and felt inside and outside. The characters living in the film's own world have their experience that is to them very real. When done well, we feel a real experience of their real experience. Empathy is particularly evocative in the use of sound and hearing. In the community of film sound designers, Saving Private Ryan is famous for applying a subjective and realistic treatment to the soundtrack. The landing and advance on Omaha Beach is presented as an experience, a feeling of being there. Bullets whiz by a point-of-view camera that adheres visually to point of audition shifts between air and water environments as characters emerge and submerge. Through sound mixing, an objective hearing collapses into single lines of subjective listening. The sound mixer on the film is Gary Rydstrom. His and Spielberg's approach is celebrated for the film's visceral connection between audience and character. An empathetic bond is established between the two. Perhaps this is why veterans of this famous battle said it felt so real and why audiences were so shaken by the scene. Malick's Thin Red Line also features an arrival of soldiers from boat to land, but in a different way. The early tactical objective of the two films is similar: take out the big guns. But as we'll see, this objective is treated differently through very different filmmakers. Saving Private Ryan has the guns in full sight, while The Thin Red Line has them hidden and unseeable by all who hope to overcome them. Spielberg's film drops its characters and the empathetic us straight into the violence of a chaotic hearing and seeing. The door to the amphibious vehicle opens and we, along with the soldiers, know what to eliminate to survive. Spielberg presents the massive guns sitting atop the bluffs. They are the known threat, the object seen in a frontal orientation. In The Thin Red Line, the unit hits the beach tense and ready for a fight. Malick sets up the landing almost as a promise of immediate action. As with Spielberg's film, Malick's characters are nervous, revealed in close-up shots that show their wide-eyed intensity. Yet when they land, nothing happens. Instead of confronting the enemy, these men must wait for them. Rather than a chaotic rush of violence, Malick builds the tension. He moves his characters into an audible expression of angst or anxiety. Kierkegaard writes that anxiety is non-specific fear. Picking up from this, Heidegger writes that in fear one shrinks back from something definite and close. We might say that this describes the soldiers of Saving Private Ryan. Anxiety, by contrast, faces up to being in the world as it is, not some specific entity. Anxiety cannot reach what is threatening. There is no definite thing. It doesn't mean nothing is there, rather that anxiety lives in a state of concern over what is already there. It is so close that we cannot distance ourselves from it. Anxiety is the world that we've already fallen into. In an audible sense, anxiety is the hearing of what is already there, but not yet known. They hear the jungle all around them. Yet there is no entity, no object, rather a condition of possibility, to borrow from Heidegger's Being and Time. This is the anxiety of waiting, an openness to the not yet. Waiting is common in war movies. Philosopher Gilles Deleuze points out that war films frequently feature the, quote, interminable waiting and its permutations of atmosphere on the one hand, and on the other its brutal explosions and its acting out, end quote. Spielberg's waiting comes later. Yet in his dialogue-heavy scenes, no one seems to be open to what's around them, and there is no anxiety. There is neither hearing nor a listening for, and instead a talking over the waiting, an ignorance of waiting as itself. Spielberg leaves no space in the soundtrack for the openness of hearing that may bring about a listening. As such, anxiety is masked by small talk, tough guy soldiers telling stories of girls and childhood. This kind of waiting, the one that cannot hear, is the middle section between two listenings of what is present and objective. In Malick, waiting comes first. His characters must silently confront the realities of nature, this unfamiliar world, before they can deal with their antagonists. They move through the forest and the swamp inexorably. The film's early hearings are continuous, expected, natural, even peaceful. There is no noise of violence or machinery. Instead, they hear insects and birds. But more importantly, they hear their bodies moving in response to this unexplored world. They become bound with the land in a way that could even be regarded as reverence. Malick's soldiers also see the effects of violence, but prior to their cause. They find it in mutilated bodies or the shell-shocked soldiers they relieve. Malick brings the violence forth only in signs, that is, in indications of what's to come. Malick's semiotics points to the past as it promises a future engagement. This is one plane among many for Malick, here of a past and future that is negotiated in the present duration. Such visible signs are gathered by the main company in what is not yet seen or known, in anticipation of what for their brothers has already been revealed. In these men there is a hearing and a waiting that anticipates a future listening for and listening within, a time of understanding that does not yet know. The Thin Red Line is an invasion of a different kind. It's not an above-ground plane of images, noise, and terror, but an anxious tension between landscape and hearing. This deeper, unseeing connection with chaos is slower, quieter. Saving Private Ryan's hearing is a present listening to. The Thin Red Line's hearing is also present, but its object remains elusive. It opens to anxiety and anticipation that constitutes an extended listening for. The film, through its characters, opens to an unknowable situation of listening within the moment, which simultaneously attempts to reach out beyond the horizon of knowability. Through this distinction of listening to and listening for, the objectives of the two filmmakers become clear. In Spielberg, survival depends on the overcoming of the German soldier. In Malick, survival spreads out across the transcendental plane of nature's possibility. Heidegger writes of a region, or opening, a standing open, as he calls it, to what is to come. The possible arrival of a listening, an act of striving toward the reveal that takes time to arrive. Malick's relative silences open various temporal paths of attention to this world they inhabit. The characters live within this hearing, always alert to the necessity of noticing. Their immediate sensorial attention lies ahead of itself toward the signs of the future, in hearing more than seeing. As Heidegger suggests, it is within such a state that authenticity or inauthenticity comes to the fore. In The Thin Red Line, the unit's advance has no visual verification, as the men reach a point where they must occupy a hill. After looking through his binoculars and seeing nothing, Captain Starro says nervously, "I'm sure the Japs got something there to protect the approaches." Only then, after this statement, does Malick finally reveal to viewers, not to his characters, the threat before them. In a hard cut to a massive gun in a bunker on the hillside, manned by someone who remains unseen. We know someone is there because the gun moves just before the cut. This is quite different than the reveal of an antagonist. The antagonism is neither a person nor nation, but instead expressed in a sign. Technology, the power of war, gleaming under the light of the sun. The gun aims downward towards its target, who is also not yet seen, not yet known. This cut between shots, a visual reveal that occurs 40 minutes into the film, also features a dramatic shift in hearing. Whereas Staros and his men are encased in the hearing of life, insects, wind and grass, birds, nature, the cut to the gun is silent. One may choose to think of this as symbolic, a promise of an eventual approach toward death. Perhaps, but the open ambience and slight movement of the gun also suggest that this man is hearing his openness. He is engaged in his own waiting, his own listening for. The shot therefore marks an empathetic shift toward the foreign other, mollifying at least to some degree a protagonist-antagonist divide for those experiencing the movie. Nation versus nation fade away to lay out an equal and shared plane of waiting, a waiting on fate, an answer to the question of survival or death. Spielberg's German gunner in Saving Private Ryan slaughters a row of American troops, and his fellow soldier pats him encouragingly on the head. In this moment, we are instructed to hate the Germans. There is no interpretation needed. The good versus evil division is established. Malick avoids such a division. As Kaya Silverman writes, Malick refuses to take sides, since all men, and indeed nature itself, are involved in the same struggle. The gun joins space and time in the same interval that marks the distance between waiting and action, unseeing and seeing, listening for and listening to. Malick's first death finally comes 45 minutes into the film, when the first two men of Charlie Company are killed. It's not a hail of noise, but a simple series of quiet, unceremonious gunshots. Contrasted with Spielberg's film, Malick's are known men. We've been with them, together learning this place and feeling their anxiety. Following their deaths is an extraordinary 50 seconds. The clouds part and the sun bathes the tall grass that whispers in the wind. It's a moment, a suspension, a duration of nature's beauty that honors the lives taken. The open ambiance is a reminder of Malick's previous film, Days of Heaven. In both, nature sounds its own eternity, independent of the actions of men. Nature doesn't care for the fallen. It moves on. But the characters and conditions of Days of Heaven and The Thin Red Line couldn't be more different. As Plato narrates the myth of air in The Republic, there is for every soul being judged after death a moment of waiting. Eventually, judgment arrives in sound, the roar announcing the descent into hell, or the shimmer of bliss for the ascent into heaven. The fiery roar of hell for Bill in Days of Heaven, or the blissful sound of harmony for these two soldiers in The Thin Red Line. This moment of reverence ends, and The Thin Red Line finally explodes. The apocalypse, a word that means arrival, comes in a barrage of noise that brings the bloody advance up the hill. The enemy remains unseen, like a vengeful god roaring from above. These dynamic shifts in audibility make us aware of the importance of a hearing that is prior to listening, what we might call a first-order hearing, a hearing that does not yet know. One's audible being is bound to the ambience of the world in which one is thrown. This world is, as in so many of Malick's films, a new world to these characters, but is an old one to the timelessness of nature. It has embedded within itself a sense of eternity, and its sound is the horizon for anyone who listens. Within this comes an audible life, a presence that tries to reach beyond it. What awaits in The Thin Red Line is eternity, the gathering of eternity, and in this the apocalypse of arrival is a Kierkegaardian repetition, the moment in which eternity comes to coexist within the time of mortality. As Kierkegaard writes, quote, "The moment is that ambiguity in which time and eternity touch each other, and with this the concept of temporality is posited, whereby time constantly intersects eternity and eternity constantly pervades time. The eternal is the repetition in the moment that strips time and inhabits it with the infinite." In writing of quote-unquote the moment, Kierkegaard uses words like invisibility, movement, vanishing. The moment, quote, is not properly an atom of time, but an atom of eternity. It is the first reflection of eternity in time, its first attempt, as it were, at stopping time.